welcome to today's Supercharged podcast. Well, I'm very fortunate today because we're being joined by our special guest, Todd Erb. Now, he is a certified functional diagnostic nutritionist and a certified bioenergetic practitioner. He's also the first guest of our new studio in our NES Health offices, so that's pretty exciting for me. Well, why don't we just start, Todd? So welcome to the show, and could you just tell the audience a bit about your early childhood, or perhaps when you started having problems and your overall transformation journey.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here for this first podcast in the new studio. So my story started pretty early when it comes to chronic illness, and I was a very healthy person, very athletic, having college basketball scouts looking at me my freshman year of high school. But then about halfway through that year, it got to the point where I just couldn't function the way that I was. At that point, the debilitating fatigue came over. I started to get widespread pain all over my body, and didn't really understand anything of why this was happening to me. I went to every single doctor up and down the East Coast and had no answers. They gave me the fibromyalgia diagnosis, and I was left with muscle relaxers, painkillers, and those types of things to get myself out of that position.
How was that for your parents?
It was stressful. None of us were really ready for that. It was hard on the entire family, definitely, because I wasn't finding relief, and they were trying to, go every avenue that they knew to try and provide me that relief, but sadly we just didn't find it for many, many years.
And was it a sudden onset, or was it a gradual decline over a few years?
It was a somewhat gradual decline. I did start to have some back spasms and stuff like that when I was 12, but I just wrote it off as growing pains and stuff like that because I'm 6'5", had many, many growth spouts, and just kind of wrote off a lot of things, wrote off a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms as, oh, you just had a stomach ache or something like that, even though it was probably much more severe and I should have been inquiring about those things. And then eventually it ended up putting me to the point where I was bedridden for months at a time.
And was did the rest of your family have any health issues at the time, or I was just curious if there was anything different in what you were eating or doing to your parents or brothers or sisters?
There wasn't really anything that I was doing differently. I probably didn't recover from the amount of athletic activity I was doing properly. So that was probably the only stressor that was different from my family. I was playing multiple travel basketball leagues at the same time. So just, doing that every single day nonstop ends up really burning you out when you're not doing the proper things to recover. But I think that'd be the only difference between it.
How bad did it get when you were at your lowest point?
My lowest point was after I turned 18. They decided, since I've tried absolutely everything else up until that point, that they would finally give me some sort of prescription pain medicine for relief there. And I was prescribed fentanyl. I ended up getting very physically addicted to it, and it ended up just getting to the point where it wasn't helping my pain anyway. So I was hopped up on this stuff all the time. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I was still in so much pain that I could barely get out of bed. So that was probably the highlight for me until I realized how much of my life had been stolen by all of these things, or even just myself. I felt like my soul was taken by all these pharmaceuticals that I was on and stuff like that. I wasn't the same person.
So you weren't even able to go to school at that point?
No, I was bedridden for my junior and senior year.
Wow,
yeah.
Wow.
And even parts of sophomore as well. I was on a homebound program. I had teachers come to my house.
That reminded me of I managed to get through school and went to university, but in my last few years of university, I was in a wheelchair, bedbound by that time, and had to yeah, well, I remember doing all my exams in a wheelchair, which wasn't so fun. Did you do your exams in a wheelchair?
No, not in a wheelchair, but I would somehow make it to the kitchen table for the teacher to show up and do the work. Luckily, I had some phenomenal guidance counselors and stuff that helped me through the entire process and helped me still finish school.
And like, so when you were in that, I guess, what was the sort of the light bulb moment for you? So you're in that really dark period, and what was it that came into your life or into your thoughts, and what did you do to sort of get yourself out of that situation? Like, was there a trigger?
I think it was building for a very long time since I was bedridden, but very, thirsty for knowledge and just to experience the world. I was always researching, even though I was like, sure, I was in a moldy basement and didn't know it, and was surrounded by electromagnetic fields with no sunlight for many times. So it wasn't necessarily helping me, but I was researching so many different avenues, so many different teachers and stuff like that, and was slowly starting to shift my perspective away from those victim mindsets that you can very easily find yourself into in those types of situations. And then it was actually a plant medicine experience that really showed me exactly who I had become and who I should have been at that point. And really,
who did you become? Like, what was the great insight?
The great insight was just that I wasn't taking care of myself. That I got into this mind state where I'd call my body my meat suit or something, because it was so painful. It caused me so many issues that I felt like I was something else, just riding this little vehicle for a little while. And I became to hate my body and stuff like that, instead of nurturing health and supporting it and helping it to go back into homeostasis. I just disregarded it, thinking that I had fibromyalgia. Nobody knew what was the cause of that. There was nothing I could do. Woe is me, all those types of mindsets. So it was a shift out of that mindset more than anything, and just a different shift in perspective. And then I buried my head into all of the research that I could into functional nutrition and functional medicine and all of that, and figured out ways to pull myself out. But I just needed that shift of mind that I actually had power over the situation, because at the time I didn't think that I did, and that was fueling a lot of the dysfunctions that were causing the illness itself.
It's a very, very similar thing. I think after I've been bedridden for, I'm trying to remember, I think it was on like the 5th or 6th year being bedridden, I had this dream of a big white hand, which maybe I thought was the hand of God, and I'm not actually a religious person. And I rejected this hand, and I think my interpretation of that is that basically, I needed to take responsibility of my own life and get out of the situation. Then it was really probably, I think it was over the next week or two, I sort of had that idea to create a home wellness system, which is a time for another story, but that's what sort of spurred having NES. But yeah, it's that same thing. It's like that transformational moment where you truly are going to take responsibility of your own health journey is so instrumental. And it sounds really easy to say, of course, when you're in the situation and really ill, you think it's we're all programmed to believe it's something external to us. We all believe that we're just the unfortunate victim that caught the virus that has this inflammation, that has some toxic thing or whatever. And while that may be true from a particular lens, it's also true that you can take responsibility for it and transform through and get out of the situation. But yeah, it's not such an easy thing to switch in your mind, but
no,
it's absolutely crucial to do so.
And it takes repetition too, because I even knew a lot of the things that I then embodied after that point already for many years. You know things, but whether or not you actually embody them into your life is another story.
Yeah. Well, and you get many, how would I put it? Well, say you can get 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or 2 steps forward, 1 step. one step back, and as you say, like you sort of end up having to relearn the lesson maybe hundreds of times at least in my case. So it's good. But just so everyone knows, we both went out wakeboarding in sunny Florida 2 days ago, which definitely wouldn't have been possible for either of us in other periods of our lives.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Cool. All right. So I think we got to the point in the story. It sounds like you were just about to start training as an FDN. So yeah, maybe tell us about that.
Yeah, I was already somewhat interested from a very superficial standpoint in all of the health stuff. You know, that during that whole journey before that, I was trying the whole raw vegan and doing juicing and even a little bit of intermittent fasting in the early days and stuff like that, but nothing was really moving the needle for me. And then I found the FDN Institute and decided to hop in and dive into as much research as I can with them and become certified. It was one of the best things that I ever did. It brought me into a community of amazing people that helped me troubleshoot so many different aspects of my life that I really had no idea that I should be paying attention to. And yeah, it was a wonderful experience. I became certified, and then I was like, well, why not, try and help other people, as I made some significant shifts fairly easily in my life once I had the knowledge that I needed to start to figure these things out.
When was that? That was like 2 years ago you qualified as an FDN?
Yeah, 2 years.
Yeah. And then, so when you did that course, is that when, you were still deeply working on yourself?
Yeah, during the entire training, I was implementing what I was learning in real time and was having massive improvements very, very quickly.
Yeah, perhaps could you tell us some of one or two of the sort of more significant things you did or you were learning in that course that helped you?
The main thing was that I had an inverted cortisol to DHEA ratio, and that's why testing is so important, because somebody who has chronic fatigue or something like that, you think that they're just completely burnt out or not producing any cortisol, not adapting to stress or any of those things, or that I would have a skyrocketed cortisol and be, always.
So when you say invert, just for the audience, what do you mean by the inverted cortisol to DHEA? Is it DHEA high, cortisol low? Or
yeah, so
low?
Normally you would have a very high cortisol when you're in a very stressed out state and dealing with a lot of toxicity, living in chronic mold and stuff like that I was dealing with at that time. But I actually had a very low cortisol, so my body was fighting these things for so many years, whether that was the terrible diet that I had prior my entire childhood and those things, that it was fighting to keep me healthy and was allowing me to be athletically able as long as I was. But then it ended up breaking, and then I wasn't producing it at all, but I still had a strong DHEA that allowed me to still be somewhat vital and somewhat make it through it. But if you would look at all my symptomology, you would think that I had skyrocketed cortisol or whatnot. And if I was following recommendations, for that, just from a lifestyle perspective, I wouldn't have been really,
Got you. And did you end up taking cortisol, or you?
Some licorice root extract really helped me out in the beginning. It keeps the half-life of free 24-hour cortisol around a little bit longer before it gets shut off.
I'm a great fan of licorice. I don't know if can't remember if I mentioned before, but I was diagnosed with Addison's for similar way. I just only produced 5% of the cortisol you should. I ended up on cortisol. And it's sort of pretty interesting. But anyway, I managed to transition off it, but one of the ways I did that was using licorice, because it mimics the action of cortisol, and it was a lovely way to get off it. And now I don't need licorice either. So
yeah, I don't need it after you start to clean up the underlining factors, all those environmental stressors and things like that as well. Then the body does start to jump back into working the way that it's supposed to.
Cool. So after you qualified as an FDN, is that when you started building up your practice, or were you mostly working on yourself?
I was working on myself, but also to that point, I was probably already in what I would call remission of fibromyalgia, or what I thought, and I was starting to form my business. And then about 6 months into that is when I found out about NES through Wendy Myers and started down the whole bioenergetics pathway of understanding health from that perspective.
Got you. And what was it that, I guess, what was it that made you open to bioenergetics? Because as going down the FDN route, I mean, that's a very, it's a very biochemistry based approach. But yeah, what was it in what was it in bioenergetics or in yourself that made you open to going beyond the sort of biochemistry?
I knew that something was missing, on some level. It was hugely mindset, which is definitely wrapped up into bioenergetics in a very profound way. And I just realized, like, there's so many people out there that are doing every protocol and the most extensive and comprehensive protocols at therapeutic doses, and they're still having trouble 5, 6, 7 years later. And it's like, what is that? They're doing everything right from that functional nutrition standpoint or functional medicine standpoint, but they're not getting the results that they want. And kind of, I was like, why is this? There's got to be something else going on. And then, I was already interested in traditional Chinese medicine and understanding things from that lens to a small degree. And then I just kind of had faith in the community that I was in. And when Wendy, did that nice little webinar, I saw that and I did a trial of NES. It was, and I had my first scan. I was blown away by it. So that was.
What happened in your first scan? So I remember you telling me the other day you did, like, I think it was $5,000 worth of various conventional tests over the past couple of years. Anyway, I'll let you tell us.
Yeah, so as soon as I did my first NES scan, just prior to that, a couple months before, I did a battery of different testing, conventional blood labs, saliva hormone panels, some urine testing for, protein digestion and liver markers and things like that. And my first scan lined up perfectly with all of those things that I had found from a Western perspective. And then what was even more so really, really interesting for me was the energetic rejuvenators. When we were going through all of my ERs and you see the meridian pathways light up and all the connections to them, I started to see correlations between every single one of the areas that I had musculoskeletal dysfunctions inside of my body. So it was, and that was the biggest challenge that I was dealing with at that time, was the level of muscle issues that I was going on with. So that was a major, like, one-to-one correlation on every single one of them.
I mean, this is just for the benefit of the audience, but I mean, a scan is basically, it's basically only aiding the decision of a practitioner of where they might look to go and do other tests.
Of course.
It just so happens that nicely correlated, but just for the audience, it's not per se a diagnostic device. Anyway, moving on. So with the ERs, maybe you could just describe what those energetic rejuvenators were, just so the audience knows what that is.
The energetic rejuvenators are the distillation of the acupressure points that you guys have put together. So it's a little bit of a further development of them. There's 70 of them, and they're all different points all over the body. One of the main ones that I can remember was the scapular field. That's where I have a massive amount of issues. It actually gave me a little bit of trouble on the wakeboard 2 days ago. But yeah, that was one of the ones that I remember.
I was trying to pull your shoulder out. Basically, I mean, the ERs basically come up in our bioenergetic wellness system scan, and that's also tied into the My Health device. So basically helps people know where they can then use the My Health device to basically rejuvenate the energy flow in that particular area. So yeah, I mean, what did you notice from using the My Health on those ER spots?
The amount of pain is probably the number one symptom that I've found relief with the My Health from, whether it's using it with the scapular field or plugging in some external electrodes and doing TMJ through my jaw on each side and stuff like that. I'd say, yeah, pain is probably the number one, but I mean, all sorts of things. I could go out to eat at a restaurant where I'm traveling and I don't necessarily have control of all variables and what they're putting in the meal and stuff like that. And I can eat something that I know isn't 100% optimal for me, but you know, we just have to eat. Sometimes we have to live in the real world, and I can throw the food sensitivity setting on, and I don't really have any issues anymore going out to eat or anything like that. That's probably been one of the most profound settings. And the cold and flu, the CFI, and any time I've woken up with any type of stuffy nose or anything like that, I've been able to, you know, clear that within minutes of throwing that on off body.
Perfect. And what was your, what was your experience like at the foundation training?
Foundation training was amazing. I was, you know, scanning a couple people, scanning my friends prior to that, but didn't really have that like immersive experience with it until then, and it was amazing. I met amazing people the entire time. I actually met my business partner down there, and we formulated some ideas about, you know, possibly creating a podcast or something like that to promote our respected businesses and NES within our businesses. And
yeah, we were talking about earlier, so you qualified as an FDN, qualified as a bioenergetics practitioner, and then you also integrate a whole bunch of NLP coaching skills into your practice. So yeah, maybe just tell us about what you sort of see as the sort of ideal or the optimal telemedicine practitioner. You know, how one builds that type of practice and integrates all of these things.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have a really nice approach that me and my partner Jennifer have built out. It's kind of the combination of all of the best things that functional nutrition and medicine have to offer, all of the, you know, Western functional labs that are fantastic for that deeper inquiry from the scan, but then you have the bioenergetics with NES Health on the other end, which is a full other, almost half of the equation, but there's, you know, mindset in there as well, and that gives you the ability to unblock some of those energetic patterns and things that could be holding people back from allowing those functional nutrition protocols and things like that, the supplementation, to actually take hold and do the job that they want to. And then there's also all of the mind-body coaching. So my partner has her master's in psychology, and we bring a lot of that dynamic of trying to figure out how you need to be thinking to get yourself out of some of the dark holes that we can find ourselves in and achieve the levels of health that you need. And sometimes that's the starting place.
Yeah, I mean, how do you go about that? Like, how do you coach the, I guess, like yourself when you were in that dark spot at 18, or me when I was, whatever I was, 24 to 27.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach that and get sort of someone to wake up and take responsibility?
Sometimes it's hard, like you said. Sometimes you need to get told the lesson or learn the lesson hundreds of times before you actually embody it. But sometimes it just takes a different perspective to show people that you don't necessarily have to think this way about a situation that you are in, that there's other ways to think about it. There's always that, like, are you the maniac or the moron on the highway? The person that's in front of you going really slow is the moron, but you're the one that's riding their back end, and they're looking in their rear view mirror thinking that you're the maniac. And then somebody comes up behind you, but they don't see the person in front of the other person, and now you're the moron that's going slow, but really it's the person in front of you. So it's kind of, there's always ways that you can kind of unpeel these self-stories that we tell ourselves and kind of reframe them so that you can at least be thinking about the situation in a productive manner.
How do you, I guess, well, do you have an example of how you would reframe, well, how do you reframe that person who's sick in bed with no energy? Like how would you?
I guess it depends on the situation. I guess what they're, maybe if that's the only thing that they're upset about, usually it's many other things. But for me, it ended up being, I turned my perspective of my illness. Like I said before, I used to call my body my meat suit and all these things, and had a very dysfunctional relationship with the entire situation. But then I saw it as a blessing.
I see. You totally divorced your mind to your body, did you?
Yeah, definitely.
And
there was
you basically hated your body. It sounded like it. Like,
yeah, definitely. And that just continued to fuel more dysfunction inside of the body and made me hate it even more. So that was, and then I thought of, I just, reframed to thinking that this is a blessing. Yeah, I may feel things very quickly. If I have a toxin or something, I get a little bit of MSG. If I'm out at a restaurant or something, I'll feel it right away. Or, I have a flare if I have a little bit of alcohol. Yeah, that sucks, but should I really be drinking alcohol and diluting myself in that manner anyway? You know what I mean? There's so many.
I sort of break it down. I sort of describe my body as like a Ferrari. It's like I pretty much have to have jet fuel, or like the perfect fuel for Ferrari. But the great benefit of that is like it can perform at a super high level, and sure, sometimes have something gets in the fuel and it breaks down a bit. But so what? At least you get to perform better in the long run.
Yeah, and that's where I shifted to, from the hatred of the situation and not being engaged with the situation or trying to numb the signals that were coming to me from my body. It was just then saying, all right, I need to use this as a tool. There's communication that's happening here. The world's trying to tell me things, whether that's things that are happening in your life that you're putting out there or internally inside of your body. It's all just signals, and I guess to pay attention to those things and then be engaged in life rather than getting upset because of a set of circumstances that occurred in life and disengaging from it, to actually just going full force into it. And some people just need to think of it that way, you know what I mean? Sometimes nobody ever even told me to think that way in the beginning. It's not that we want to be stuck in those victim mindsets or anything like that, but sometimes we just don't have the knowledge to even break out of that mindset.
We're not educated about it, that's for sure. I mean, it's not taught in school. It's not, and if your parents don't know it, I mean, you just...
Yeah, it's hard to, same thing with even nutrition or anything, especially as a kid, my parents didn't have the education that they needed to feed me right, with the amount of genetic mutations and environmental factors and things that occurred. And it's just you can't get hung up on those types of things, because then we all do the best that we can with the knowledge that we have at the time, and the goal is just to get more knowledge, that way that less of the bad things can continue to happen.
And I know, like, you're obviously at a pretty young age, you're amazing age of 24. 24. Also you built this telemedicine remote practice pretty quickly. What are some of the things that you learned from doing that, and how, if you were giving advice to someone you setting up as a health coach or setting up a telemedicine practice, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned, and what advice would you give them?
First off, I would say you need to get your mind right. There's a lot of those mindset things that can block you from business. It doesn't matter whether you're trying to achieve a health goal or a business goal. A lot of those same, situations can come up, and you can get frustrated with the, technical difficulties of building your website or something like that. So a lot of the mindset goes into building that as well.
Trusting the unfolding. I mean, at least for me, obviously, I've gone from bedridden, wheelchaired, obviously to owning and building a company. But there's been a gazillion lessons on the way of that. But one thing that's sort of always, I think, been helpful for me is always trust in well, two things. One, we always trust in the unfolding, because we don't know all the answers today, but I trust that I will know the answer tomorrow, next week, next month. And then the second thing that goes with that is like it's just this attitude of lifelong learning. And the thing, when you have Google, well, we all have Google at our disposal, which basically will tell you anything. And and you can do expensive masterminds and courses, but actually most of the information is probably somewhere for free on the internet in a blog or a video, and it's all there. So I think, to me, like the question or the questions are always more important than the answers, because if you get clear about the questions and what you don't know, the answers will appear, like they always do. Well, you only have to go looking and the answers appear. But at least in my experience, like for a lot of people, they just get, as soon as they have the question or that thing, or they think they can't do something, they don't turn it into a question, and they don't have faith that the answer will come. So yeah, anyway, that would be what I would think.
Yeah, definitely. That's a massive, massive part of it. And then there's just little trivial stuff about the process of, putting a little bit of an intake before your initial free consult or something like that, to just establish a little bit of responsibility of the client on the other end to fill those things out and give you the information that...
So you're like having a client apply. You're not taking any client, you're actually getting clients to apply to be a customer of yours, and that's actually working in sort of like reverse. I mean, the traditional thinking is like you market or sell a service to someone, and what you're saying is you basically make the client or customer apply to you. So actually the customer has to sort of sell themselves to you in a way.
And we are selling ourselves to them as well, but they're definitely, I can't heal anybody. I can only give you some tools that and help co-create a roadmap for you to traverse your health journey. And there does need to be, a bit of that personal responsibility that we talked about already, and just little things like that establish a wonderful rapport between the client and practitioner relationship right off the bat, and it's just good to set the stage with that.
Got you. Yeah, and you were just, you were mentioning about being frustrated with technical issues, and I know for just gazillions of us, it's like it can be a bit overwhelming. It's like you have to set up a website. Like, should I be doing a podcast? Should I don't know, do Facebook ads?
Figure out MailChimp and
email campaigns. I mean, there can be a lot. And at least from my experience, it's like just do one or two of them, get that right, and you can add another. But obviously, I haven't built a clinic. You have, but what's had the sort of highest impact? Like, what would be the lowest hanging fruit for you from that sort of technology point of view that people should look at first when they're getting going?
I think that they should always be driving people to their personal website versus staying on other platforms that they use for the distribution of their marketing, or even like value add of like one-to-one talking on Facebook groups or something like that. But just bring people back to your own website and take their email address, because that's where most of the communication still happens and where most of sales still happens, even though nobody really likes to be sold on Instagram. They like to have value added at Instagram. But then if you're not directing people to then go to your services or anything like that.
How are you getting those people to your website?
Just driving them there, telling them to go check out the blog or something that I just wrote that day, or also giving away free content. Like, we have a roadmap for functional health, little PDF guide that we give away and stuff like that. Also,
but is that because you're really active in other forums, and so then people go back to your website? Like, how are they actually, like, you give stuff away, but who are you giving it to, and how do they actually get that content?
It's delivered either through a membership platform on my site or through email, depending on if it's like a like the PDF that you get for signing up for our newsletter comes inside of the first email and stuff like that. And then there's links to a little free course on downregulating the stress response that we put out there. So
you're basically creating valuable content that is a solution to something one of your ideal clients would be looking for, and then they're finding that content through Google.
Through our outreach, we're also on those other platforms as well, but it's not only staying on those platforms and not necessarily driving people to look at your services on your website and stuff like that. It's like you can get lost in only doing the value add and not be talking about your services or what you can actually provide to people.
Got you. There's a lot of ways of packaging up your services, and you can do just by the hour one-on-one consultations. You can do 6-month, 12-month programs. There's a gazillion variety of doing those sorts of things. How do you do that, or how do you think about that?
We made a couple packages, but we split them apart. So we like to foster a really good relationship and make sure that we are good practitioners for the clients that we're getting, and that the clients are good for us as practitioners. So we split things up a little bit. To first come on board, we have a discovery session that's 2 hours. It'll go through your entire history, a comprehensive blood chemistry analysis on a conventional blood panel that we have run, and then look at all your past labs and stuff like that to finish out that intake. But that's a little standalone session that somebody does just on their own, and that's the starting point for us to establish your background and have that first session to get to know you and all of that. And then if you like the recommendations that we make at that point, then you can either buy a time bundle with us, or we have a little Kickstart program that has 4 sessions with the 4 main types of inquiries that we like to do on pretty much everybody, because we do take a bio-individual approach, but everyone has hormones, so we run a Dutch hormone panel. Everyone should get a NES scan, of course, and then everyone has a gut, so Viome is our go-to for gut metabolic testing. And then
I just finished my Viome, and I'm not quite sure, but my gut looked pretty good. So
yeah, your gut looked pretty fantastic.
I have the top 1% of shit in the nation, apparently.
Indeed.
Indeed, God. Don't think we'll talk about that anymore. What else were we going to say?
Yeah, and then we just have the genetics panel, and that, everybody has genes and everybody has different mutations and stuff like that. So that's pretty our foundation. Of course, there's other types of inquiry that we'll do with different types of clients, but everybody pretty much needs that foundation. But you can also work one-on-one specifically if you need to go at a slower pace or anything like that. We do have that availability, but just breaking that discovery session up in the first part just gives everybody an option and doesn't make them, lock into multiple thousands of dollars of coaching for a year or something like that when, somebody else may be better for them. There's different practitioners have many varieties of different skills that can better suit different people in different positions. So we just like to make sure that it's all a go as we work with people instead of just trying to run through it all,
Got you. And so you ended up, so in the last year or so, I guess since last November, you've been integrating bioenergetics, functional nutrition, coaching. What's happened in your own life or for your own health over the last year by integrating that more? So you said you got a bunch of your health better through the clinical nutrition. I think you were telling us the other day that the scan had picked up a bunch of digestive issues. I think some liver stuff,
some micronutrient deficiencies
and that type of stuff. So from those recommendations that have been in the scan, maybe just complete the story to say what's happened in your own health journey over the last 9-10 months.
My health journeys over the last 9 to 10 months has actually been pretty interesting. Like I said, at that time of forming my practice and stuff, I considered myself in remission of fibromyalgia. But then Viome came along and told me a completely different story about my gut than every other functional medicine or conventional lab was able to tell me before that. So I was actually just propping up a pretty broken gut, one of the most severely broken ones that I've seen so far. So I turned out
your gut was worse than any of your clients.
Yeah, to this day I haven't found a Viome that was worse than my original one. And I look at them quite often. But so I realized, like, all right, I have a ton of work to do. Yeah, I may have gotten a lot of symptomatic relief allopathically through all the things that I was doing. Even though I was working on underlying causes, I wasn't anywhere near as, therapeutic dose level that I should have been at and the comprehensiveness of the protocols I was using. But now I had the data to actually do that, and I ramped up doing pretty decent NES protocol on top of, I was doing weekly scans at most things up to 28 drops of infoceuticals and moving pretty quickly with them, and was getting tons and tons of relief. I went from having the most broken gut that I have found so far to now being right behind you at the 98th percentile in.
Oh, you're not.
Yeah, now I'm way up from the 30s up into the 98th percentile.
They probably don't record more than the 99th. They probably don't do the 99.5, do they?
Probably not. I think there would be 100 though. There probably would be a last 100th percentile, depending on if you're probably up in the 400 microbes or something like that. But anyways, I went from that extremely, complete pathogenic takeover and all of the stress that I was still supporting. I got my cortisol levels back up where they should be with adaptogens and stuff like that, but they were still having to deal with all of that pathogenic activity. I was still just propping up that broken system. And the high-level NES work that I did in tandem with the high-level pharmaceutical-grade nutraceutical protocols that I was doing for gut repair and, pretty broad spectrum. There's detox support, endocrine support, and, it's pretty comprehensive health restoration protocol that we use. And I was able to completely turn that around, 5 times the amount of diversity. I went from doing they used to have a sugar challenge with Viome the first time that I did it. It's about 12 Red Bulls in one glass, about amount of sugar that you'll drink. And yeah, and I did it, and then 4 hours later I was so brain fogged that I couldn't remember why I was so sick at that point. I couldn't even remember that I did the test that morning. And then in this past March I did their blood sugar case study, which, even though you don't have to do the sugar challenge for the testing anymore as a consumer, during the case study we still had to do it, and I did that and actually moved out of a house, killed the whole day, didn't have 1 ounce of headache and whatnot. So I restored all of my ability to process carbohydrates and stuff like that within my Viome, and then every other kind of symptom that I was having, which was broad spectrum. I could name probably hundreds. That's kind of the fibromyalgia thing, is that it's so unbelievably widespread in symptomology that it's really hard to figure it out. But I had improvements across the board, and pretty significantly once starting NES to a decent degree. To do a nice little 28 drop of chill and liberator protocol for a little bit that practitioners sometimes do for dealing with the amount of emotional toll that can come with dealing with not only our own health issues that got us into the profession in the first place, but then also having the care and worry about all of our clients as well. So that was a wonderful experience for me. I kind of feel like I shed a lot of the trauma that I was holding on to for many, many years that was keeping me in that state, that was most likely fueling my gut dysfunction and stuff like that, from that little protocol that I did with Liberator and Chill after the foundational.
And then, obviously you're just about to move from, is it Connecticut?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, sorry. Yes, you're just about to move from Pennsylvania down to Florida. And yeah, well, maybe it's worth just telling people a little bit about why the environment is so important. It's also a move I made from California to Florida, and actually, yeah, my own health's enhanced a lot in doing that. Mainly because you get exposed to sunshine and sea. So I just spend an awful lot. Well, actually, I do a lot of hydrofoiling in the sea and sun, and as per like the Supercharged movie, that really helps to charge up the body's battery, and so you end up with a significantly abundant energy. But yeah, well, anyway, perhaps as
yeah, that's definitely why I'm making the move from good old Pennsylvania. I definitely don't like the winters and those types of things. They were never good to me. So just having the heat and the sunshine, I think a big problem that I had in my life was once I did get sick, my bedroom was in a basement that was also moldy. So I was then bedridden in a moldy basement with electromagnetic fields surrounding me, the panel box for the whole house, like 2 feet from my bed and stuff like that, but no sunshine for literal months at a time. I would not even leave my house or not even have a window, or just when I like went upstairs to eat or go to the bathroom or something like that, if I could even make it. And it was...
So for you, a lot of that situation was just probably purely the space that you were in.
Yeah, I was definitely had some other things happen, like the elbow to the back of the neck that I took in basketball is another little factor that was kind of around my downfall. But mainly it got to the extent that it was and the severity that it was, mainly because of the environment that I was in after it already started. I probably would have had a much easier time with the entire experience had I lived in either a different location or at the very least not laid in a basement with no sunlight for months at a time.
Perfect. And is there anything? Well, if you were gonna talk to yourself when you were 17, 18, what would be the message that you would give to your younger self?
That I know it's hard to not get frustrated about like not having that knowledge. Back in the day, I used to get angry about the fact that we had, toxic laundry detergent in the house and stuff like that for many years, and it used to, aggravate me because not everybody it doesn't affect everybody in the same way. So then what I was trying to make happen wasn't happening in my environment, and it really created a lot of stress for me. But if I could have had that perspective of just take the responsibility for yourself and do whatever you can in that moment and just work with it as best that you can.
Yeah, you can only do
it would have been better.
Yeah, you can only do what you can do, and then you have to let go, otherwise you drive yourself mad.
Indeed, yeah, and that's what I was doing. I was once I figured out the level of environmental toxicity that's going on in this world, it was almost a panic stress state constantly, and I almost worried about it entirely too much. But then also would get mad because other people weren't realizing it as well, and that just wasn't a productive state to be in.
It is like a pause to reflection, because obviously you can really go down the rabbit hole with that stuff, but in the end, how many people are there? There's like, 6 billion people on the planet, and I've got a little pet dog right here, but there's like billions and billions and billions, and there must be another 50 billion animals or whatever it is, again on the planet, where all of the animals and all of us are all consuming all these toxins all the day. Most of them are fine. Most of them are fine basically till old age, when it accumulates and gets a bit too much. And I think we can blur it out of all proportion in the end, and we can adapt our bodies to at least. Well, we can adapt our bodies to at least tolerate it, or work with the environment that it is.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Todd. I think this will be a good ending.
Indeed. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.